Hi, welcome to Tokyo on Fire. Today is February 27th, 2015. My name is Timothy Langley. This podcast is the fourth in a series. We speak on issues of political importance in Japan, and we hope to appeal to a wider audience who are interested in following these issues. Today I'm joined with colleagues Michael CUCEK and Dr. Nancy Snow. Michael CUCEK is the famous author of the foremost blog on Japanese politics, CUCEK. He is also adjunct fellow at Temple University's Institute of Contemporary Asian Studies. Dr. Nancy Snow is two-time Fulbright Fellow. She is currently at Keio University's Institute of Media and Communications Research. She is currently writing a book on Japan's national branding. Today's burning issue is on scandals. Scandals as they occur typically on a regular basis in Japan. They are part and parcel of what happens in Japan in normal politics. In fact, you can date certain eras in Japan by the scandals that happen. They come up with alarming frequency. Recently, there's been a long hiatus of no scandals, and now since the Diet is in session and various members of the cabinet are called on to the hot seat to be quizzed by opposition parties, certain things come to the public eye, and it raises a lot of attention. The Diet is currently in session. These questions are being offered this week and into the week, and there's been some interesting disclosures. Today's burning issue, once again, is scandals. I'd like to ask Michael CUCEK his opinion on what's going on currently and how that affects the ongoing political process here in Japan. Michael?
Well, we had a big surprise in the resignation of the Minister for Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries, Mr. Nishikawa, who, after fighting for several months, allegations that he had accepted donations, or at least his campaign staff had accepted donations over time which were illegal, he threw in the towel and gave up trying to explain himself in the Diet in questioning. That throwing in of the towel may have been voluntary, or he may have been pushed by the Prime Minister. This is not the first resignation since the reshuffle of the cabinet last year. This second cabinet of Abe Shinzo has now lost its third minister. And this week, and later in the week, we have seen tough questioning of the Minister of Education, Mr. Shimomura. And it's possible that his head is on the block. If that is the case, it's going to be a huge blow, because Mr. Shimomura is a longtime associate of the Prime Minister, and he's very much associated with the Prime Minister's revolution in social affairs that has not yet taken place. Mr. Abe has led a revolution of economics, he's led a revolution of Japan's security policies, but always lurking in the background, well, lurking's kind of a negative word, but always in the background was the issue of social policy, and education is the most important one, and Mr. Shimomura was going to be, or is supposed to be, the vanguard of that. We'll see if he survives into the next week.
Isn't this just political football, though? I mean, watching from the sidelines, although we're rather close and we follow this, with keen interest, it does seem to be a lot of just pulling the legs of those people who are a little bit ahead of you. The LDP is in a position of power. The opposition wants to diminish them, and somehow by diminishing them, their position or their power rises, or maybe they can use this as leverage. We won't attack as hard anymore. We've got 3 more days to talk about this particular issue. Maybe we'll back off and throw some softballs, but there's a lot of dynamics going on there, as it almost typically does.
Well, it's kind of different this time around because first, it's been after a very long period where there were no scandals.
That's right.
It's the first cabinet of Mr. Abe was the longest serving team ever in Japanese history. It's hard to imagine that even though he's not been the Prime Minister in office the longest, he and his first cabinet of the...
That's 2.0.
Yeah, the 2.0.
Right.
His first cabinet lasted only a year, and that cabinet went through 4
That was
agricultural...
disastrous, wasn't it?
It was a disastrous one. But this one, the first one that he put together after his return to power was really stable, worked great as a team. This reshuffled cabinet from last fall has been weakened. Well, he tried many things. He tried to bring in new blood. When you bring in new people who haven't been necessarily vetted as thoroughly as the first cabinet was, you're going to open up the possibility for discoveries of unpleasant and or illegal activities. It's hard to run a campaign and stay ahead of the law. The law is incredibly complex. The rules are arcane. They're, in some ways, you can even call them stupid. Mm-hmm. They are designed in order to make not the campaigns as honest as possible necessarily, but to make it as difficult as possible to break in from the outside. You can even say that the LDP is being tripped up by the rules that it has established in order to keep itself in power. So that's fair. There's one other aspect, which is that the DPJ, the main opposition party, when it was in power, was subjected to an intense and unending attack from the LDP. Even when the DPJ would offer legislation that the LDP had written, the LDP would not vote for that legislation. That creates a situation where what goes around comes around.
Getting their licks in.
And they're going to get their licks in, and this is karma, is one way of looking at it.
Well, the other kind of motivation here is to appeal to the public. I mean, the TV is on them all the time, and the pressure must be really intense if you're sitting in the hot seat. Even though you don't like or respect the person who is questioning you, there are lights and cameras and all of your colleagues are sitting around you. And I think part of this is designed to appeal to the voting public or to diminish the I don't know, the confidence or maybe the credibility of in particular, the cabinet. Mr. Abe, either directly, very few people will go direct, but they go indirect by attacking his cabinet. Any comments on that, Nancy?
Well, I think what Michael's describing is really almost like a scandalous system in place, because my first impression of Japan in the 90s, coming on the heels of its big economic boom era, was this revolving door of prime ministers and political leaders and an image of a lot of political instability. And also, from the public's perspective, a system that was very closed off from the public, as Michael mentioned, with a lot of archaic rules. It's not easy to be a neophyte and to get into this process. So while there may be individual cabinet people who have to resign, and of course that makes headlines, I think it's important to look at the landscape view here of a system that is really not holding itself terribly accountable to the public good. I know in this series I'm sounding like a bit of a broken record, but I really do think that while Abe has gotten, his administration, Abe 3.0, has gotten to be a lot more disciplined and on message, and probably is vetting people better before they come on board. Nevertheless, I do sense from the public a lot of unease about this administration and some of the proposals being put forth. So it's not just the people who are resigning, because the Japanese people are pretty used to that over the years, but it's more about they are proposing things that are more assertive, that are off-putting to the public.
I've been here a long time. You've been here a long time too, Michael. And I remember when I first started becoming a little bit interested or following Japanese politics, and it is a major component of becoming familiar here. I mean, you can't escape it. The loud soundtracks during the election period. In the newspapers, there's always flash news, something's happening, and you see, or at that time you typically saw older gentlemen with loud suits and, surrounded by people and photographers with lots of microphones making comments. And gradually, as I got into it, I understood the ebb and flow of Japanese politics and the players who are involved in it. And one of the great things about being involved in Japanese politics is it's a good investment of time, because the players rarely change. And even if the players do change, their power filters down to a son or maybe to a brother or something like that. So it's a good system to really invest yourself and to follow what's going on in politics. And that political field has changed a lot over the years, and there are a lot of younger members of the Diet now too. But the thing that keeps recurring is this a focal point of when the cabinet is assembled for this kind of questioning, the knives really come out, and it's payback time. And on one level, you might think it's just questioning. We are ensconced in power. We have a cabinet. We have a prime minister. We can take these hits. But it doesn't always turn out that way. I mean, some people have actually ended their own lives after being on the hot seat, and the pressure there just must be incredible.
Yeah, it's an abusive process, to be sure. And politics, as in many countries, is a blood sport.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of the resignation of Mr. Nishikawa, the amounts of money involved were minuscule.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You can't think that his vote was ever bought by the illegal donations of the size of them. They're simply just too small. And in the case of Matsushita Midori Matsushita, who resigned in the fall, she was resigning because she handed out paper fans,
Yes.
Very strange.
which violates the law, the letter of the law, but that a paper fan would be considered an illegal gift to the voters, and that would convince voters to vote for her as receiving some kind of remuneration is ridiculous. But the LDP put itself into this position. This is payback.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, in the past, when you and I first came here, it was a little bit more genteel, and in order to get in trouble, you had to be caught with a lot bigger amounts of money.
Gold bars in
the
couch.
safe.
Yes.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. And millions of dollars, not just a few dollars here and there, or the price of a paper fan. But as people have become more adept in following the rules, the amounts have fallen. If you really want to go for somebody, you will be able to find something. It's very hard to stay up. And that's what's sinking Mr. Shimomura right now. And normally, maybe the prime minister would stand by him. And especially since it's a longtime friend and ally, you would think that the prime minister would put everything out for him. But he let the two women ministers in the fall go on very minor things. The Obuchi, that's Minister Obuchi's, former Minister Obuchi's investigation is still ongoing, and they're going to find a lot of things, not necessarily about her, but certainly about her staff. That will probably send a few people to prison. But letting Matsushita go for the paper fans, letting Nishikawa go for relatively small amounts of money, it sets a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And where does it end? And it only ends when you can have a truce with the opposition.
Right.
And the thing is, the opposition doesn't see a truce possible.
Mm-hmm.
They feel that they were assassinated, they were stabbed with the knives when they were in power, and they have a few more months or a few more years of stabbing the LDP ahead of them. Or maybe it's going to be eternal.
Mm-hmm. Well, this part of the session, it's rather limited, so they really come out swinging.
Oh yeah, they have to get the budget done, and the budget committee is where all these questions happen, which means that the actual work of the committee is not getting done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't know if Shimomura, the Minister of Education, is really in that much trouble. I watched the proceedings. It was pretty tough, but I've seen a lot tougher, and I see that there's a good cohesion within the cabinet now.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting that the first time that the prime minister who it's not that he prided himself, but he put it out front that he wanted to have women involved in politics and in society and in business, and he was pushing that. It was some people called it womenomics.
Mm-hmm.
Abe's womenomics. And the first two, when he reshuffled his cabinet, he put 2 female ministers in, and they went for those. And I think that was just because You know, you think you're going to, the message was, you know, if you think you're going to capture the women's vote, you know, you got another thing coming. But I thought that was just really bad pool, bad politics. Because like you said, the violations that they potentially had pale in comparison to, in the grand scheme of things, what else is going on.
You know, I think this is what keeps a lot of women in general out of politics. The blood sport,
Yes.
the rough and tumble. And I don't think it was any coincidence that the two women were targeted. And that was to send a message, really, to keep...
Go for the weak link?
Yeah, of course, because I don't think we have a long history in Japan. And certainly, even in the U.S., a lot of women are not interested in going into politics because, one, they don't want their private life to, or perhaps maybe marital status or their looks to come into the mix. Even Hillary Clinton has been subjected to a lot. So when it comes to scandal, oftentimes in the United States, it's sort of your personal failings that we've seen with even Bill Clinton and a lot of politicians. And here, it seems to be these little minutiae. I thought it was very strange with the paper fans. I just found it to be so bizarre. But I understood that it was intentional to target these women, to basically get them out of the way. And that will definitely impact other women considering to go into the process. Because women are just generally not acculturated to really subject themselves to some of these brutal battles that are often just words waged, but we don't grow up doing that so much. So it's not that we can't do it, but we just haven't been practicing in that. And so we tend to avoid politics, and then that impacts the ability to have full equality, though, in society. With Abe, the problem I have is that the scandal to me is that it's still just this focus on the top level. It's so elite driven. And so a lot of the sort of overarching issues of equality are left on the cutting room floor.
Yes, they become victimized as well. Yeah.
Well, the issue, perhaps in the case of the resignations of the women in the fall, what made it so salient was that basically the argument was they had to go in order to keep the diet on schedule. And then Abe throws the entire diet schedule into the wind by calling an election. So people who supported the women ministers, who were against the resignations, they say, what was that about?
Yeah.
You know, who are you kidding? You know, that's not right. And the thing is, now we have the same kind of pressure going on. We have to keep going. Mr. Nishikawa, please step down because we have to get back on track in the budget. Otherwise, in budget committee, otherwise we're not going to get the budget done by April 1st. They're not going to make it anyway. Nobody believes that. Everyone believes there's going to be a continuing resolution. Everyone believes that the budget will be passed sometime in April. But the problem with that is that April is when the unified local elections happen. And all of the members of the Diet were expecting to get everything done by March the 31st, and then go for 2 weeks, or actually the process is over the entire month of April. The first 2 weeks for the first set of elections, and then another set are being held on the 26th. They were thinking that they were going to be helping out their local official friends. That's not going to happen because everything is delayed, and the opposition knows it, and they love it.
Yes.
They say, come on, we're going to be the little tail that wags the dog, and you have majorities, you can do whatever you want, but as long as we have the ability to stand up in the budget committee, we're going to torture you. And we're going to torture the country in the process.
Well, that's what happens. I mean, the question. It seems like in the sessions when they're going through these questions, it is not the questionnaire who is being evaluated poorly, even if the questions are bad. It's always the person who is on the hot seat, who is answering, who is the one that is damaged. You don't score points, you only lose points.
Right.
And the person who is asking the questions is almost scot-free. You're just asking questions, there's plausible deniability. Well, I heard this and I read this and a little bird told me this, and can you please explain yourself? And they can get away with an awful lot.
You can get away with incredible sarcasm. For example, this week, after Mr. Nishikawa resigned, Mr. Nishikawa delivered a classic line about, the Prime Minister understands my explanations. But, and this is the line, those who, no matter how many times you tell them, those who do not understand will not understand. Now, what he probably meant was, those who receive paychecks and our paychecks are dependent on them not understanding,
right,
will not understand, no matter how many times he stands up and says, this is what happened. They're going to pretend that they don't understand. Well, the socialist member of the Diet who got a chance to talk in this week's budget committee, asked the Prime Minister, excuse me, Mr. Prime Minister, please tell us the thing that you understand that those who don't understand won't understand. It was just for effect, but he just loved to say it.
I wonder what role the press outside of these questioners has in this mix, because related to scandal in Japan is the, I guess you see in a lot of the news stories in the last few weeks, this sort of declining questioning by the press of government. And that is an angle here. So it sounds like there's a lot of this sort of almost Saturday Night Live comedy taking place with the question and answer of the Prime Minister. But what about the Japanese media? Are they sort of...
You're talking about self-censorship.
Yes, and yes. That has been raised by a number of the international reporters here who write for news wires, and then these stories go global. And in addition, there have been a couple of surveys that have shown the overall sort of free press ranking of Japan to be in decline.
Yes, it used to be so high. It used to be one of the highest in the world.
Yeah, what we had this week was the release of it was a petition saying, let's not self-censor ourselves. And 1,200 Japanese journalists have signed this petition.
I've also signed it.
Yeah.
So international people have signed it
as well. And it's an idea that's coming about that we really do not, we the Japanese press, do not report to the extent that would serve the public best. That we indeed cut ourselves out and are afraid. In this case, what a lot of people are worried about is the discussion of security issues.
Right.
And it's very much in response to the reporting that was done during the ISIL crisis, involving the 2 Japanese hostages who were later murdered. Criticism of the Prime Minister in certain news organizations seemed to result in your being no longer invited on the TV program, no longer viewed, or you had your contract no longer extended. It's not, you're out. That has happened for a lot of Japanese journalists, and they're thinking, how did we get to this position? And
I wanted to add to that, I think my motivation came out of the post-9/11 environment, where there were also similar questions. It's interesting that some are referring to this ISIL event in Japan as sort of Japan's 9/11, whether or not
Japan's
that's accurate.
critical event.
Yes, critical event, meaning that when you have this raising of these international security issues, that's the time you need to be ever more vigilant and questioning. That's not the time to defer to the central power. And there's a tendency, we call it the rally round the flag syndrome, which again is this sort of looking to your leadership, and sometimes you look to the leadership with blinders on. And I rely on the press to be sort of my ersatz, my kind of accidental monitors of people in power. And I want them to be not dogged in a really dogmatic manner. I mean, you can write opinion pieces. I want them to uncover what's going on. And I don't see dark shadows everywhere, but just give me information that can empower me about what is really happening here, sort of a true sense of the environment. So I see those parallels with what happened in the United States. We had actually publishers going to graduation exercises and being booed if they dared raise a critical question about where we were as a country after 9/11. There were people walking out on these, and that's very shuddering to me.
Is that because the national sentiment was so strong and so
yes, not
cohesive?
to question. It was all about unifying the country. And I see that happening here. The rhetoric is very much about making Japan or saving the Japanness of Japan, which is often very ill-defined. But I understand that to have some sort of coded implications to that.
I'm going to step in and say, I think there's a lot of hooey, personally. I think that the news here in Japan is wide-ranging. It can be wild and woolly. No, they don't scream. No, they don't yell. But they ask tough questions, and they get away with asking tough questions. And if you ever watch, for example, the Prime Minister's press conferences or the Chief Cabinet Secretary's press conferences, the level of disrespect shown by reporters just slouching there in the seats, it's something you would rarely see outside of this country. They have a very, very sarcastic and cynical view. It's not like you will see on the evening news the images of how they're seated and how they're talking, but you can sometimes sense it in the timbre of their voices. So this question of whether there's been self-censorship, well, I kind of find it kind of funny that you would be able to sign a petition saying, I don't get to express my opinion enough. But you're signing a petition. You're obviously expressing yourself. Nobody's taking anything out on you.
Right, and actually that petition was not about saying that we don't have the ability. It's saying let's not kind of cower from speaking up now. So you have to really read the language closely. And I mean, we can disagree here, but I do talk to a lot of Japanese academics who teach in media, and so they are employed at university, and they will tell me when I give talks and go to these study meetings that they are very worried about the direction. And they often will single out NHK because it's so huge and it's well funded, and so they tell me. So it's not just my observation alone, but I agree though that you don't want to see dark shadows everywhere. I mean, you don't want to go to the extreme, because that happened in the United States with this sort of looking at 9/11 as orchestrated by the U.S. government. That became very extreme, and that became Hooeyville. So,
well, in the case of the 9/11 illustration, it was first floated by a man named Kunihiko Miyake, who is a close political advisor in international affairs of the prime ministers. He's the head of he's head of research at Cannon Institute. And Miyake-san put that out, and the New York Times picked it up. And when Miyake-san was talking about 9/11, he was thinking about, this is the kind of event that will shock Japanese regarding their thoughts about how to keep Japan secure. But very clearly, the other side of 9/11 is the one that you're describing, which is the self-censorship, the rally around the flag, don't criticize the prime minister aspect, which is what the reporters and academics are talking about. So it's the two faces, and it's the latter, the unfortunate one, that the really unfortunate one that is taking the precedence here.
I think that the level of belief and credibility of the American population to the mass media has declined a lot. And you're seeing signs of that here in Japan. But I think the Japanese government is still going to go forward aggressively on this National Security Act. This has been in motion for a long time. If you take a look at the current Prime Minister's residence, it is huge, it is massive. It used to be a small 3-story structure, and that was the Prime Minister's, it was like the White House, and across the street is the Sorikante, the office for administration. And now it's a huge office, and part of the office is devoted to the national security affairs and how they handle crisis management. But I think the food that the journalists feed on is access, and access can be easily denied or granted given certain situations. And I think that is a very effective tool to controlling what story is being fed, what kind of meme is being repeated over and over again. And I think the National Security Act, should it go into legislation, gives the central government an incredible amount of power to limit the amount of information that is disclosed, and if it is inadvertently disclosed for some journalist to write about it, they can get into an awful lot of trouble. And that is very much cold water on a lot of stories that might be coming up.
You know, I just wanted to interject. I don't know how often you all read the comments section of the online news stories, but you know what's filtering now, it's almost trending, is this crying out that people say we need an Edward Snowden or we need a Glenn Greenwald in Japan, that you don't have this sort of active either major leaker like Snowden, or you don't have someone like Greenwald who is trained as an attorney but then went to write for The Guardian and got the biggest get of his life, which turned into an Academy Award winning documentary film, Citizen4. So I didn't, this was relatively recent post-ISIL that I started to notice people referencing. Of course, these are a lot of internationals living in Japan, but I thought, well, I don't know if Japan needs an Edward Snowden, but that is telling, though, when people are using that language.
I would like to say, though, that the press, yes, you can control them. Yes, you can cow them with the new legislation, which is still being passed. But it's also very hard to keep them from biting back. If you push the press hard enough, they will find a way to get you. And that's what one can say is happening to the Abe administration right now. They had a great run. They had a long time scandal-free, historically long scandal-free stretch. And with these restrictions that were put on under the special Designated Secrets Act, you started to see maybe a far more active press. And now, again, the scandals that are being reported are tiny. And it's really testing. The press has to be a participant in this. It has to sell to the public the fact that these scandals matter. And so far, they've been trying to do so. A more objective point of view would be, these are so tiny, you've got to be kidding. But no objectivity is is there. And that may be simply because they're biting the hand that's been feeding them.
And that also says a lot about where we are now with our media environment, that it is very hard to distinguish between the news and opinion, that firewall of protection has really declined. And what I see in Japan is often a sort of coming from the government shaping a story for domestic consumption, like Abe's visit to Yasukuni in December 2013, how that played so differently to the within Japan versus how it played regionally and internationally. And you can't make that mistake in Crisis Com anymore, where you think that you can shape your message to domestic and then to the foreign. There's just no demarcation line now.
So who's controlling that?
Well, the control is, I mean, a lot of this is internet driven, and really even how we are defining who's a journalist anymore. As I said with Greenwald, he didn't really work his way up in a newsroom. He became a personality. And so that's what you're seeing now is personality-driven journalism. And that's where credibility comes in. You don't want to be too far out there where you just have your converted souls who are kind of cheering you on. But it makes it very difficult then to control rumors and control scandal, to get everybody to be disciplined and on the same page is not like it was 20 years ago when I worked for the government.
Well, okay, let's put it concretely. What should Mr. Abe be doing in order to put a brake on this juggernaut of tiny scandals that are coming at him that require participation of the press in order to get them going, and with an opposition that will bring up these tiny things? How should he be handling this scandal?
Well, I mean, so far it seems like they're handling it well, because I don't see that his numbers are really going down. It still looks comparatively much more disciplined than it did the first time around. But you have that sort of death by a thousand cuts, too.
Yes.
If it became repeatedly a problem in the spring that would impact the budget, and then it has this sort of reverberating effect, and then the public gets a little bit up in arms about it, then you've got this kind of a snowballing effect where it just keeps growing and growing. But I think thus far they've been able to manage it, because just the way of the recent resignation, it sort of
very quick.
Went very smoothly, and it didn't really impact the prime minister. So
I think that the scandals are part of the matrix. They're going to happen in any event, whether they're big or they're large. And there seems to be a biorhythm to them. They come and then things settle down. And I'd like to get back to the earlier comment that you had about the resignation of the two female members of the cabinet, Minister of Justice and Minister of Trade and Industry. And then very soon after that, the Prime Minister closing down the House and saying, we're going to open it up for election. I believe that was retribution for the poor handling of those kinds of questions and the forced resignation of those two people on his cabinet.
Oh, there is in Japanese, in political tradition, what's called misogi, which means ablution, a rinsing away. And it's maybe a kind of a concept that people say, really, this is actually an idea, but there is a belief that a general election washes clean all sins, and that if a person is engulfed in scandal or is threatened by scandal, that if there's a general election and the voters say it's okay, this person's okay with us, that the opposition or whoever has been pressing on the scandal issues will back off. And the funny thing is, it's actually been a tradition in Japanese politics. And that has to do something with the relationship of the courts to the Diet. The Diet, constitutionally, is the supreme body in the Japanese government. And the courts have naturally deferred to the Diet. If someone wins election, there's a presumption, okay, whatever the violation, big or small, may have been, if this person can get the approbation of the people, who are we to say,
vindicated.
He's been vindicated.
Not quite vindicated, but absolved.
And absolved, or at least go forth and sin no more.
And he who is without sin should not step into Japanese politics.
Well, the technology that is growing so quickly, and this comment that you had about, who is a journalist and what is media and how is it proliferated. We're doing a podcast now on issues that we feel are important and that we would like to talk about and have other people comment on, is a great example of who is a journalist and how are issues raised up and is it opinion or is it fact? And I think it's a great part of the the media world that we're in now.
You know, Walter Lippmann published probably the definitive text in journalism in 1922 called Public Opinion. And at that time, he said the role of the press was to present the facts to the people who can't experience those facts directly. Mm-hmm. So it creates sort of a pseudo event. And the press then, you're looking at primarily pencil press. So it's without all of the technology tools that we have today. If you were to ask Lippmann, who is a journalist, he would have a very narrow definition of a journalist. He would view journalists within the context of sort of an elite, highly educated, maybe Ivy League educated mm-hmm. core of people. And because of this decline in credibility around politicians who are often the subject of journalism, you have this growth industry now of people coming into journalism who really haven't been trained to all the techniques that mm-hmm. Allow you to do good research. And so that's what we're seeing increasingly online with the internet. It's putting out fires of rumor mongering. This is what a lot of government officials in public relations end up doing.
Well, apparently there's a hunger for it because we feel compelled to want to talk about these issues. We
right.
feel that there is a wider audience and that the issues that we talk about are ripe for input and for discussion and examination. And they're learning tools for us to predict what's going to be happening and how to prepare ourselves, how to prepare our companies in decisions that are going to affect a lot of people or our consumers or market shares or a lot of different things. So I think it's good work, but I think we're filling a need that hasn't been quite addressed. And there are probably lots of other people who are doing the same thing, identifying different aspects of culture or business who have come up with this same idea to use technology to get this word out.
Well, it makes scandal both more prevalent and also less prevalent. It's very hard for anyone, a government or a business leader here in Japan, to try to manufacture something mm-hmm. and manufacture anger. There are just too many players in the market. We see, for example, when something's brought up on the floor of the Diet, it used to be, if it didn't make the evening news, it disappeared. But now you can not only go online, you can get a Twitter feed from someone who's sitting inside the room, one of the members of the Diet, can be tweeting away, this is what's important. Look at this phrase. This is what this person said. And it can be used positively or negatively, but in this conflict of ideas that's now available, it's really hard for the government to shape a message. And in the case of scandal, which is what we have here, I don't see Abe having the control that people are so fearful about.
Okay.
Precedent means so much here, as it does in a lot of other countries. The fact that the Prime Minister in Abe 1.0 had 4 resignations from his cabinet, and he pretty much threw in the towel after that. He resigned after that, closed it down, and the LDP faded from power as a result of that. This time, he's got 3 resignations under his belt. The current one, just this last week, was number 3, and there's a certain sense that maybe if we can get number 4, it will topple the Abe government. I don't think that's true, but I think that that's probably a goal that the opposition might be aiming for. And the question is, really, if there even if there is another resignation, isn't the cabinet and the administration and the Prime Minister strongly entrenched now that even if there was a resignation within the next 2 or 3 weeks, the cabinet could survive something like that?
Well, Dr. Snow brought it up, that his numbers haven't gone down.
Right.
The polling numbers are all above 50%. They found no matter whether the poll was by a news organization that supports the Prime Minister or one that's deeply opposed to him, the numbers are static and they're way up high. And quite frankly, unlike in the past, for example, when Mr. Abe was in his first term, there were people waiting in the wings to come in. Mr. Fukuda, Mr. Aso. Here, there's nobody there. It's Abe or nothing. At which point, the revolving door aspect is gone. There's nobody to replace Abe waiting with bated breath to take over. So to say things remain the same, yeah, sure, scandal, constant movement. But in this case, there's also change. And that change is stability at the top.
Yes. Well, I mean, stability in Japan is defined by some sort of a unitary body that is deciding issues, and that these decisions are somewhat made behind closed doors. We don't need to have a lot of people inputting into this process that we have. This happens in companies as well, that it is a vacuum, and we make decisions, and these decisions are made within the context of our world, our globe. And I think that provides a sense of stability, but it also provides a kind of a environment where things can happen and they just get let go.
It makes people resentful because they're not part of that process.
Right.
And that's where these little piddling scandals brought in from the opposition with the connivance of the press come into play.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
That they feel excluded from the process, and they have been. Absolutely. No question. I mean, when Mr. Abe wants to shut down a debate, he can. He just says, let's vote.
Yes.
And the legislation will pass because they've got the majority.
He must be feeling quite strong, Prime Minister Abe, because he's going to speak to both houses of the U.S. Congress
Yes, he is.
this spring. And he's coming after Netanyahu from Israel, which has become a political hot potato in Washington because of the Republicans backing Netanyahu and his not really having the sit down with Obama. So maybe by the time Abe comes in, which will probably coincide with cherry blossoms in bloom, then that suggests to me that he's feeling good about where the administration is here, despite these scandals. And that says something, too, about a political leader. That confidence is remarkable. And just my study of Abe versus his first term, wasn't that less than a year? And I think by the time he left, his favorability numbers were in the 20s.
Yes.
So he's a new man from what I can see.
Well, he's got to survive this current session, and it is tough. The opposition is out. But I think in spite of the scandals, and I don't think they are terribly huge, I think he's still in for a pretty good ride. Wouldn't you agree, Michael?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that his party's going to do really well in the April elections. The most recent polls, which I think was conducted by the Asahi Shimbun Group of 3,000 voters, found an extraordinary, nearly 50% of the voters were supporting the LDP, his party, which is just an insanely high number. The DPJ was at a very high number as well, at around 12% in this poll, but near 50% is unprecedented in the last 3-4 decades. He's got to feel confident. He's got to feel that, okay, this is a lot of political noise, and yes, maybe one of my best friends is going to get swallowed up in it, but hey, that's the game that we're playing.
You do wonder in the polling, are people, though, thinking it's LDP or nothing? Because you do wonder if they see any legitimate opposition. I'm not hearing that there's really, as you said, there's nobody standing on the side ready to get in.
Well, I think Michael's comment was a little bit different. I kind of agree that the LDP is pretty much here to stay. It has been taught a lesson, and I don't think it wants to learn that lesson again. So I think it'll continue to be strong. I think it'll continue to be successful. I think Michael's comment was more about the leadership, and we have a current prime minister, and there doesn't seem to be any contenders. And from my perspective, I think there are some contenders. They're probably in the background. They're biding their time. Others know about their aspirations, but it's impolite and it's unpolitic to kind of raise yourself up. It's very rarely seen, and usually when that does happen, they have an election for prime minister, and that's when the people really raise up the candidates for prime minister, and they're jostling for power, and sometimes relatively unknowns become prime minister.
Oh, I think that in this case, though, that Abe has created a brand new standard in terms of slaying those who might come up against him within his party. In his first term in office, he gave to
yes, he did. You're right.
He gave positions to all of the people who ran against him, and he gave them impossible jobs. He gave to Ishihara Nobuteru, who was presumed to be the front runner when Abe first ran for the presidency of the LDP. He gave him, as a consolation gift, the environment portfolio, which put him directly in charge of the Fukushima nuclear power plant. It was a kiss of death. We have not heard a word, or we've not seen Ishihara since. And he did this to Hayashi, who has just come back as the new agricultural minister this week. Hayashi was one who ran against Abe. And Abe said, great, here, take the ag minister portfolio, which is also a kiss of death. And he did this to his most recent challenger, Ishiba Shigeru.
Yes.
He said, I'd like you in the cabinet. I'd like you to be in charge of the security legislation. And Ishiba, who is a big security wonk, said, no, I don't want to do that, because that's a kiss of death, and I know you're doing this to me. So he gave him the rural revitalization post. We don't see anything of him anymore,
That's true.
even though it's a hot topic. Rural revitalization is the one thing that Japan really has to do to get back on its feet. But Ishiba, he's not on the evening news.
What's the cushy post?
What's the cushy post? Gosh.
The one where you know that the person's really in favor with Abe. That won't be the kiss of death.
That's internal. That's in internal affairs and communications.
Playgrounds.
Internal affairs and communications is the one.
Good.
That's the people that he likes.
Well, there's also the Northern Territories and
that,
Okinawa.
yeah. That's a great one.
But they've complicated that one by putting space and technology together with that. So that actually has become a very packed catch-all almost.
Yeah.
The minister of that one is, he's very busy juggling a lot of different issues.
Right.
So I don't know if there's a cushy one, but yeah, probably you want to keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
That's right. And he's brought his enemies into the cabinet, and he's slain them.
Okay.
One after another.
How about Nancy's other observation that it looks like the LDP is stronger and the opposition is going to hold its own? And what are your views on the position of the LDP moving forward and collecting more votes and establishing itself stronger so that the next time this election comes around, the LDP wins far, far more seats?
It's hard to say because the DPJ has put in place what seems to be finally a stable and fairly active leadership. And they were very, very careful this week to come out with an explanation of what went wrong in December. And the first thing they said was that we did badly. We blew it.
They owned it.
They owned their own mistakes. And when they didn't reach three figures in the number of seats that they took, they only got 78. They say that is a failure. Now, the fact that they could pin it all on the former leader of the party is great for the present leaders of the party, but they owned the fact that they had failed and that they're not going to go down that road again is the way that's what they've said, and I'm pretty sure that they will. The other party, the other major opposition party, the Japan Innovation Party, the JIP,
right.
They had their first convention. It's a party that's been made out of mergers. And it had its first convention, and it had a chance to make a big splash and say, here we are, we're brand new, we have all these new ideas, we have all this unity and all this wonderfulness about us. It didn't happen. And it's as if they didn't have the convention. There was no immediate payoff. Maybe there will be down the line, but currently we're back toward a 1.5 party system, sort of, with one big, huge party, and the DPJ, and then the nothings.
I don't think you should call yourself Innovation Party if there's not going to be a whole lot that's going to come out of it. It's innovation to nowhere.
Well, they couldn't have called themselves the Charisma Party either.
Well, in the case, they have Eda Kenji as their leader. And Eda has probably been, at least in terms of the English language, he prides himself in his ability in English. He's an international businessman. He has had absolutely disastrous choices in terms of the English language names. He called his party that split off from another party the Unity Party. Yeah, but you're a splinter group. He loves his own thoughts, and he's currently the head of the party. And so he said, Japan Innovation Party. That's what Isshin, which we know as restoration.
Right.
Direct translation. No, it's going to be innovation. So you can that's a message person you have to get in contact with.
I think so. Exactly. I'll do that.
So with that, I'd like to draw this discussion to a close. You've been listening to Michael CUCEK and Dr. Nancy Snow talk about our burning issue today, which is scandal and the role of scandal in Japanese politics. My name's Timothy Langley. If you'd like to subscribe to our podcast, please download from iTunes or go to YouTube under the inflammatory title of Tokyo on Fire. Send your comments to us either on Twitter at #TokyoOnFire, or you can write us to comments@tokyoonfire.com. Thank you, and join us next week.